What's up YouTube? Hope you guys are all doing well. So we're back here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where we are filming our intro, but this session is not filmed here in Florida. It's actually filmed at two different locations. The first one's going to be Parks up in a suburb of Philadelphia. It's like 45 minutes outside of the city. And the second one is at Texas Card Houses. Texas Card, that's not, you know what I mean. That's not correct grammar, but you get the point. TCH's new property in Dallas is called TCH Social. And that place was great. So you guys will see both of those in this video. The reason I'm merging both the properties is just because there wasn't enough hands at Parks, and I just wanted to throw in a few hands. So hope you guys enjoy this as always. And once again, enough rambling. I'm excited to show you properties outside of Florida, which will actually be the recurring theme probably within the next year or so, because I'm leaving my apartment here in Florida exactly a week from today, and I'm going to be going to Vegas for the series, and then after that we'll see, maybe back here, maybe Vegas, you never know. So as always guys, I appreciate the support and I hope you enjoy these hands. Let's go.
First hand of note, granted we already have been playing for around an hour and a half, just not many notable hands prior to this one. We see a cutoff raise to $30, we see the button and the small blind call, and now action's on me in the big blind with king 2 of clubs. We can flop the nuts, turn the nuts, river the nuts with this kind of hand with a flush, so I make the call and we're off to see a flop. The flop comes Jack 8-10 rainbow with 1 club. We don't have much, checks to me, I check, and action ends up checking all the way around. The turn is a 10 of clubs, so pairs the middle card and gives us a flush draw. I decide to rep the 10, which is a little bit ambitious multi-way, but gonna mix it up every once in a while. I decide to bet pot. I bet $120. Considering the flop checked around, pretty sure no one has a straight, and I guess me being in the big blind, I can rep the 10 pretty credibly. So when the button calls and the small blind just flat calls, this pretty much caps the range. They never really have a 10 here, and they never really have a straight. So if the river's a brick, I'm pretty sure I can just bomb it, and it'll put a jack in a pretty tough spot. The river now comes a 2 of hearts. So literally the biggest brick we could have asked for. It checks to me, and once again, as previously mentioned, I'm almost certain neither player has a straight or a 10. On the other hand, I think I could very well have either a straight or a 10. So I'm going to put the pressure on, basically just trying to get a jack to fold. I decided to bet $500, which is a little bit over the size of the pot. The button snap folds, and now my friend TJ, who I actually traveled here with, is tanking. At this point, I'm certain he is a jack, and if anyone's going to hero call me with a jack, it's TJ, because I've probably played more poker with him than anyone. Praying that TJ lets his cards go. I'm telling a pretty strong story. Hopefully this time he believes it. And after around a minute, he picks up a chip, he puts it down, and he mucks his cards. So we got this one through. I decide to show the 2 of clubs and tell him my river to set, which obviously makes no sense. In this one, we are in the cutoff with 8-5 of diamonds. We make it 30. We see the small blind call, which is an older gentleman who hasn't shown down any hands, so he's kind of a wild card. He makes the call, and the big blind folds, so we're off to see a flop in position. The flop comes king 5-7 rainbow with 1 diamond. He checks it to me, and once again, this player has been check raising, just being an absolute maniac for the majority of the session. So I decided to bet small. I bet $20, and he normally acts pretty quickly, but this hand, he takes his time and genuinely looks like he has a frustrating situation, and he eventually calls. I don't think this is an act. I think he seriously just has a very weak hand. The turn now is a 10 of hearts, putting a backdoor flush draw out there. He checks it, and no sense in betting here. I decide to check. The river now is a 3 of clubs, so a pretty safe card. If we were ahead on the turn, we're probably still ahead. Without thinking too long, he puts out $140. A pretty big bet. My initial reaction was just to fold because we have a very weak hand. But I started thinking, I don't think this player ever has a king here because he would have acted quicker on the flop. I don't think a 10 is ever choosing the sizing. So that being said, the only hand that really makes sense is like pocket 3s. Once again, he would have called quicker on the flop with 4-6. If he had like 5-3, just any pair on the flop, he would have called quicker. So when there's not many hands that he could have, I normally decide to just call. So that's what I do in this one, and he mucks right away. So pretty small pot, but luckily we end up getting the maximum. This table's been pretty passive, so when we look down at king 4 of spades in middle position, it's good enough for open. I make it 30, the small blind calls, and the big blind gets out of the way. We flop middle pair on 8-2-4, 2 clubs, and 1 spade. He checks it over to me. I bet 20. He decides to now check raise to $60. There's a lot of draws out there, and with middle pair, I decide to make the call. The 5 of spades comes on the turn, so now we have middle pair and a flush draw. To my surprise though, he now pumps the brakes and checks. I'm pretty sure if he had a draw of some sort, he would continue to bet. So at this point, I'm pretty sure he has showdown with a hand that contains an 8. He check raised the flop to see where he was at, and now he's not too sure what to do. With that being said though, we do have showdown and a lot of equity. I don't think an 8 is folding on this card. So I check it back, and now we see the ace of clubs on the river. Once again, he decides to check it over to me. So now I'm almost certain that he just has an 8 or some middling pair. Obviously, if he had a flush, I would imagine he would have bet the turn or led out on the river. That being said, we cannot beat an 8 even though we do have a pair. So I decided to bet $120 as a bluff, and luckily he releases his cards right away. Parks didn't go too well. We were in the game for 4,000, out for 3,775, so we lost 225 bucks. Nothing crazy considering that we were down a lot more earlier on in the session. But now, it's time to wrap this up and let's go to Dallas. Now, the first hand at TCH Social down here in Dallas, there's a under the gun straddle, there's a middle position raise to 35. I make it 125 out of the small blind with queen 9 of diamonds. Maybe a bit ambitious, probably should just call, but I think a raise is fine every once in a while. And now the player in middle position decides to call. So going heads up to a flop at a position where it comes down jack 7-3 with 2 diamonds. Obviously a pretty good flop. We go ahead and flop a flush draw and an overcard and some backdoor straight draws. I decide to put in $125 once again, and he pretty quickly makes the call. At this point, he only has around $650 behind, so when the river comes to ace of spades, even though we do not directly improve, this is a really good card considering that we raised before the flop. Trying to figure out what bet sizing to choose, and once again, with around, $500 in the pot, and he has 650 behind, I think all in is probably the best bet. We can fold out middling pairs. We can probably fold out a jack. So that's what I decided to do. I bet $700 or $800 signaling that I'm putting him all in. And he does not snap call, which is good. And after thinking for around 40 to 50 seconds, he eventually calls. So we're going to need some improvement on the river. The river comes to queen of spades, which is actually interesting because now we beat any jacks or any middling pairs. I two my card, and unfortunately he has ace king. So maybe the action here in Texas isn't quite as good as I thought it was, considering he tanked so long on the turn. I was almost certain that we were good now with the queen, but nonetheless, we are going to be losing this one. Nice hand. In this one, 2-5-10, once again, the under the gun straddle is on. We're first to act, and we look down at 2 red 8s. Easy open, we make it 35. Now a player in middle position makes it $110. Folds back around to me. This player hasn't gotten out of line too much tonight, but nonetheless, he looks competent enough to be raising light sometimes. And with 8s and with a lot of money behind, I think our hand is only going to be playing as a call here. So I put in $110 and we're off to see a flop. The flop comes queen 5-7 rainbow. Pretty good board, only one overcard. I check it, he puts in $80 and I'm pretty happy to make the call. The turn now is an 8 of spades. That's right, we go ahead and turn a set on a super dynamic board now. Now we're praying that he has a hand such as aces, kings, ace, queen, king, queen, a strong hand. Now, with a lot more draws out there, any 6 being open-ended, 2 spades, I decided to put in a smaller bet as if I were bluffing. Maybe he can capitalize on this, potentially think it's weak. So I throw in $100 and he decides to make the call. Not too sure if this is the best line, but I think it's good to mix it up every once in a while. So now when the river comes to the ace of hearts, I'm a little bit indifferent about this card. On one hand, if he has a hand such as ace queen, we're probably getting all of his chips. Fairly unlikely, but if he floated with ace king, maybe ace king of spades, those kind of hands, I don't imagine he would fold once he improves. But once again, on the other hand, if he has a hand such as king queen, kings, queen jack, pocket tens, those kind of hands, I don't think he's going to be calling a bet regardless. So I'm going to target the top of his range, his really strong hands. I bet $700, which is a pretty big bet. He doesn't snap fold, nor does he snap call. He's in the tank for around a minute. He eventually decides to fold, unfortunately, and he shows 2 red kings. Kind of sucks. We do run good there on the turn by hitting our set, but we run bad in the sense that the river was an ace or an action-killing card. If the river was like a 2, any other card really, we probably would have got a lot more chips. So sucks, but it is what it is. We see a fellow poker vlogger, Alex, or as you guys probably know him as Wolfgang, comes into TCH Social, sits down, so I decided to get a table change and try to take a few of his chips. First hand in, literally first hand, I'm under the gun, I put the straddle on, the button calls, the small blind calls, the big blind calls, and with Wolfgang here, I looked down at 4 deuce. Just disregard this whole sequence of events. I announced that I'm going to be squeezing, just trying to build a table image, look like a maniac. Yes, I know this is silly, don't reenact this, but I was just feeling frisky in the moment. I make it $115. The button calls and the other 2 players fold. So not the best outcome, but it is what it is. The flop comes out Jack, Jack 9. There's no flush draw out there. Action starts with me and we have 4 high and we're trying to build a image here. So I bet $75. The button now doesn't think for too long and makes it $225. Okay, well this sucks. We have 4 high, so we're just going to fold, right? Well, I don't think so. I don't think he's ever doing this with the jack. I think, once again, it looks like I'm bluffing pre-flop based on my dialogue. So I don't imagine he would ever be fast playing a jack because it'd be folding out a lot of my bluffs. So to be honest, I think he's bluffing here like a lot of the time. So once again, if I think he's bluffing, obviously he's bluffing with the best hand, I'm going to be putting him to the test. I put in another bet. I 3-bet the flop with 4 high to $550. Yes, this is actually happening. And luckily for us, he snap folds. So by me trying to show off in front of Wolfgang and also building a table image, we actually make like $300 where we probably should not have. So it is what it is. Do not reenact this. In this one, we see an under the gun limp, an early position raise to 30. We're in the cutoff with 10-9 of diamonds. I make it 100, and the initial raiser decides to call. So we're off to see a flop. We go ahead and flop top pair in 10-7-4. He checks to me, and I decide to bet $50, but in hindsight, I think I should be betting like half pot because the likelihood that a 10 is going to be the highest card on the board by the time of the river is pretty thin. Nonetheless, he does make the call, and we're off to see a turn which is a 7. He checks it over to me, so 10-7-7-4, still pretty sure that we do have the best hand. There's a complete rainbow on the board. I decide to check it back, which I think is actually pretty silly. I think I'm playing this hand pretty poorly because once again, our hand is pretty vulnerable if an ace, king, queen, jack comes out. Luckily for us, the river is an 8 of hearts and he checks it once again. At this point, I'm pretty sure that we do have the best hand. I bet $200 just targeting some middling pairs and he pretty quickly folds. In this next one, we see Wolfgang straddle under the gun. I'm in the small blind with ace 5 of hearts. We see a middle position raise to 35. We see a late position call. I decide to make it 200. We're doing what we do best, overplaying suited aces, especially in the wheel variety. It folds over to the player in late position, and he decides to call. So at least we got this pot heads up. The flop comes out queen 4-6 with 1 heart. I decide to put in a smaller c-bet. 125, and he decides to make the call. So we're off to see a turn, hopefully an ace, a heart, a 7, a 3, any of those cards. Luckily, the turn is a 7. So now we are open-ended along with our ace. It is a 7 of spades, putting a backdoor flush draw out there. I decide to keep my foot on the pedal. I bet $350, and luckily, he doesn't think for too long and folds. In this next one, there's a raise to 20, and there's a few calls, I forget how many. I'm in late position. I make it 125 with ace 4 of clubs. Once again, overplaying suited wheel aces. It's a reoccurring theme ever since I started playing poker. Unfortunately, Wolfgang looks like he has a decision to my left, and he now puts in another raise. Unfortunately, it folds back around to me, and not in the mood to play out of position against a player like Wolfgang with a hand like mine, especially for the sizing. So I decide to show him the 4, and I unfortunately release my cards. Not that eventful, but we had to throw one hand with Wolfgang on the block. In this one, we see a under the gun straddle. I make it 35 in middle position. We see a small blind call, and we also see the straddler call. So we're off to see a flop. An 8-8-7 rainbow board looks pretty good. We go ahead and flop 2 pair, Checks to me, I decide to bet $35, but in hindsight, I think a check here is fine as well. Probably not going to get 3 streets with our hand. The small blind calls, and now the player that was in the straddle, he now check raises. This is definitely one of the more competent players at the table. He definitely knows what he's doing. That being said, I think he could be interpreting my smaller c-bet as being light. And also, there are a lot of draws on board, such as 9-10, 5-6, but having a 9 in our hand doesn't help. That being said, though, I think our hand is still a little bit too strong to fold yet, especially this player, even though we definitely don't love it. I make the call, and the other player folds. The turn now is a 2 of hearts, putting a backdoor flush draw out there. Doesn't change a single thing. And now he continues for $325. Definitely not a comfortable spot, because after this sizing, we still have around $900 behind. That being said, though, I think this player still is capable of doing double barrels, but the question is he going to shut down on the river after I make this call, or is he going to put me to the test? We could already be drawing dead if he has an 8. That being said, I think our hand still against this specific player may be a little bit too strong. I'm really regretting not just checking back the flop and pot controlling, but I make the call, praying that the river goes check, check. The river now is the ace of spades. At this point, he does go all in for $1,100, which is very frustrating. I would imagine he would shut down on a lot of his bluffs on the river, considering I called a pot-sized bet there on the turn. But nonetheless, here we are, him bombing away at the river, putting us to the test. At this point, he's obviously just saying that he has an 8. And sure, at this point, the draws such as 6-9 suited, 9-10, 5-6, they all missed. We're still ahead of those. But once again, having a 9 in our hand doesn't help. And I think we can just simply find a better spot, as frustrating as this is. So I reluctantly fold, and I'll never know whether or not this was the correct decision. Not really happy with how I played this one. Once again, a recurring theme in this vlog. Last hand of this log, we see our early position raise to 20. We're next to act. We make it 65 with king, queen offsuit. Folds back around to him, and he makes the call. The flop comes out ace, queen, 6, all hearts. We do have the king of hearts. He checks it to me. I put in a small c-bet, and he decides to make the call. The turn now is the 9 of diamonds. Doesn't really change too much. He checks it over to me. And at this point, with showdown and a lot of equity, I decide to check it back. Although, once again, I think a bet here is fine as well. We can target worse queens, worse hearts. The river is the 10 of diamonds, so we do not hit our flush. Unfortunately for us, he now leads out for $200. Not the best spot in the world. We're losing to just so many hands. Pocket 9s with a heart, pocket 10s with a heart, 9-10 with a heart, any ace. We know that he doesn't have the nut flush draw because we do have the king of hearts. So with all these variables, along with this player type, it sucks, but I just decide to fold. With that being said, that was the last hand of this vlog. Hope you guys enjoyed these hands from properties outside of Florida, and I'll see you guys here shortly. In this one, we were in the game for 2,500. We were out for 2,704. So we won $204. Nothing crazy, but it's always good to book a win.